Thank you guys all for coming today. My project is the impact of childhood adversity on adult interpersonal relationship and exploration of expressions of affection and social connection. So that's just like basically a fancy way to see like how childhood adversity has impacted like our relationships with friends, families, partners, and yeah. Some things about me. I'm a junior from Northern Virginia. I really love neuroscience, psychology, kind of just all things brain. There's a couple other things about me, but yeah. Today's agenda, first we'll do like background, like what is childhood adversity, the effects of it on health and behavior, and then basically what are the five languages, five love languages, which is what the categorization I use. And then I'll get on to the study I conducted. Part one, the background knowledge. So, what is childhood adversity? Childhood trauma and adversity is defined as all forms of physical, emotional abuse, neglect, or exploitation that results in actual or potential harm to a child. This is very relevant to today because 1 in 5 children in America experience a traumatic event before they reach adulthood, and 64% of Americans have reported at least one adverse experience by the time they reach 18, which means, as the years progress, this is only becoming more relevant and more connected to more people. So more people will connect with this and have experienced this, and, will have the possibility to help these people in the future to like kind of learn about themselves and, how their experiences have shaped their behavior in the future. The effects of childhood adversity on health. So some of the effects are increased depression, anxiety, lowered self-esteem. These things can contribute to substance use as a coping mechanism. It also alters neurobiological development, which means like your synapses will fire neurons at unexpected times, maybe too often, maybe not enough. Like if you grew up in a tumultuous, in childhood environment, like where, danger is very present, like your synapses will always be on high alert, heightened risk assessment, and your brain will not have had the abilities to form the correct pathways for emotional regulation and like to have emotional reactivity at like normal levels because they never were able to experience it. And like the brain mirrors what it sees, so if it doesn't see it in your childhood, it doesn't always form those pathways, which can affect you as an adult. So the effects of specific childhood adversity on behavior. So all child types of adversity rely on, or all adversity relies on your parental relationships as the basis for the future. But specifically, experiencing physical abuse has led to a higher desire to be hurt, to find yourself in an abusive cycle and strict environment because that's what you're comfortable with. It's what you know. You kind of find yourself because it's all you've ever known, really. For those who experience verbal abuse as a child, there's a desire from distance. You want to distance yourself from those like harsh words. You don't want to open yourself up for the possibility of having people use those vulnerable thoughts against you. You're more reactive because yelling and whatever has been used as the main form of communication. Those who experience sexual abuse, there's a desire to be helped, but a low desire to express anger or be controlling because those were things that were used against them, that were twisted, and they internalize that as never wanting to show those things. And sometimes it becomes unhealthy to the level they don't validate their own anger. For experiencing physical neglect, studies have shown they become less compromising. They hold others to promises because once your bare necessities have been like taken away and you didn't have them, like you grow up being like, no, I need to hold people to giving me what I feel is the bare necessity in our friendship, in our relationship. And so they become very rigid in that sense. And then we've got people who experienced emotional neglect. They desire distance and to not avoid conflict because to them, they grew up only having conflict as their form of communication with the loved ones, with those people who are supposed to be their everything. So you grow up thinking like conflict is the way, to express that like we're in a relationship, we care. And so it kind of twists your perspective in the future. What are the five languages? We've got physical touch, which is all about physical closeness, to show comfort and security. We've got words of affirmation, using words to like gratify, understand, respect, and like value your partner. We've got quality time, which is just kind of setting aside meaningful time to like deeply understand and connect with your partner. We've got acts of service, which is basically doing something to show, to make your partner's life easier, to like show that you care and that you want to take a burden off their shoulders. And then we have gift giving, which is basically used to express like appreciation and importance, not through the price of the item, but through like effort and showing like I was thinking about you. And that's the categorization method we're going to use for like showing affection in adult relationships. So my methods, I developed questions based on a literature review. I got an SRC to approve a 19-question survey and created a consent form. These questions would ask like on a scale of 1 to 5, how often do you give words of affirmation, or how often do you receive physical touch, just to get a basis of like, do you give this love language a lot? Do you receive this love language a lot and like it? And then we asked like a very vague question to be like, have you experienced? And then we listed the types of adversity and like kind of what they mean, because, that's a very sensitive topic. And we asked a couple outlying questions, just to see if there was any other correlative information. We advertised this study through physical flyers and social media. The only criteria to participate in the study was that you had to be 18 years or older, because we wanted to study basically how it affected you in your adult life. And so to do that, you needed to be, of 18 years. I got 54 participants and responses, which was absolutely amazing. And we utilized a one-way ANOVA to analyze the data. A one-way ANOVA basically compares two categorical information to see if there's a connection between whether having, one thing will boost your odds of having another. And in this case, it's having, experiencing a certain type of adversity versus giving or receiving a certain love language. So our data pool showed that basically 29.6% of all participants had experienced physical abuse, 42.6% had experienced verbal abuse, 24.1% experienced sexual abuse, 44.4% experienced physical neglect, and 16.7% experienced emotional neglect. So that's just kind of an overview of like what our data pool is looking like. And then, so this was using all of the participants' data of what they preferred, to give love languages and to receive love languages. So for giving love languages, there was the highest category of words of affirmation. And then for receiving love languages, there was the highest category of acts of service. But then to break it down to show, our correlative results, we found that experiencing verbal abuse had high levels of words of affirmation, giving affirmation, and you can see that giving words of affirmation was 12.6, which is the highest piece of the pie. And then we found that physical neglect was connected to giving quality time in adulthood, and that one was shown to have 12.6. So you can see just a little bit specifically towards all the people who experienced verbal abuse and kind of what love language they preferred for each of those categories. And so next we'll go into kind of the reasonings, or what I believe, kind of correlates these things. So verbal abuse and giving words of affirmation. So as a child, you would develop an awareness for the positive and negative effects of words. So like whether words are used, to uplift you or to tear you down, you become very aware of like the words you use, because you know how detrimental they can be. So you would you would make a conscious effort to only use those words to positively validate your partner, or at least just be more aware of how your words can affect your partner. And so you would want to treat your partner differently than how you grew up. So you want to, not make the same mistakes as your parents, and kind of grow from that, and use, words of affirmation to, just kind of gratify and show that you care and love about your partner. And then we've got physical neglect and giving quality time. So due to a lack of basic necessities and safe environment, you would want to, it makes sense that you'd want to develop, a space to give your partner a safe, caring, open space, unlike one that you'd had. Like you didn't have one as a child, but it makes sense that you would want to give your partner what you didn't have, because you know how much it hurt to not have that. And as I previously said about physical neglect, there's a like a level of accountability that you become rigid, you hold people to promises. So accountability becomes very like centralized to people who experience physical neglect. And with that, you kind of, if you value accountability in others, you obviously are going to likely show accountability to an extreme. So, showing reliability is going to be key. And, if you are always, worried about like showing that your partner that you'll be there, quality time is a great way to express that. Like you show up, you dedicate the time to them, you want to be meaningful with that time you spend with them, like you will show up. So, there's that like reliability aspect of the physical neglect effects of physical neglect, um, and then there's that part about if you're being undervalued and underappreciated, it can be a motivator to show your partner that they are valued and they are cared for, because that's something that they lacked. A lot of times, just an overview in all psychology, people will seek to make up for the things they lacked. So if they lack, safety, they're going to in the future create a safe environment for themselves and the people they choose to put themselves around. If they grew up, in a house where words are, manipulative and thrown around, and you grow up and you're like, I won't do the same thing. Like that's a very once you become to that stage where you understand like how things hurt you in the future, you develop in a way that you just don't want that. So you don't want to treat people the same way that you were treated. Um, so some of the limitations of my study was we relied on self-reported data, which can be unreliable because it's a sensitive topic, so people might not want to share some of this information, and it could lead to underreporting. So saying like, "Oh no, I didn't experience certain types of trauma." There's also a stigma a lot of times associated with experiencing trauma that may also cause underreporting. Um, the survey utilized yes or no style questions, and the questions, were not designed to be very in depth or invasive. So they did not cover, severity or longevity of, your adverse experiences. Also, the sample size was fairly small for a psychological study. And there was kind of a disproportionate numbers. There was a lot more female responses than male responses, which could kind of vary the results. So for future directions, I think that the study could genuinely benefit from a wider demographic, more equal gender responses, different age ranges. All of that could really be beneficial to the study just to see if it, is applicable against, all ages, genders, etc. Um, I also think it would be, a good idea to investigate how adverse experiences affect the genders independently, because, with societal pressures, you'll develop in different ways, or different experiences will, I think lead you to different conclusions. I think that would be an incredible thing to really look into. As I stated, like severity and duration have already shown to have different effects in other studies. So I think that it may also, vary the results for expressions of love. And then finally, 8 out of 6, we found in our study that 8 out of 16 people who selected that they experienced physical abuse also said that um, they want to resolve conflict quickly, which makes sense because if all conflicts in your home end with physical violence, it makes sense that in the future you want to cut that conflict off quickly as possible. So I think it would be a really interesting study to kind of develop how childhood adversity may affect conflict management. Okay, and thank you guys for attending. Do we have any questions?
Fantastic. Yeah, any questions? Really fantastic presentation, Samantha.
Thank you.
I have one question. If I'll see here. I have a question from Victoria. So, what was the most interesting thing that you learned in your research?
I think one of the most interesting things I learned was kind of just like how like your brain is actually like physically altered. I didn't get to explore that a lot without like access to like brain scans, but that's kind of like what my biggest interest is. Like the chemical balance like genuinely changes with the experience, like with adverse experiences. Like synapses fire differently, chemicals are produced at different levels. I didn't get to explore that a lot in this, but that was probably the most interesting thing I learned while like making all my background research.
Fantastic. Great job.
Thank you.
Absolutely.